fantastic to have you all here this afternoon for this really special tour with the chameleon himself, Abe Frajndlich. His eyes can see two things at once. A chameleon can look this way and look that way, and often that's a lot about maybe some of the photographs, you know. Many people know Abe's most iconic portraits of artists and photographers and actors. We wanted to bring in all these other amazing layers of over 50 years of photography, starting out in the black and white world of the 60s and 70s.
I knew absolutely nothing, but within about 5 months, the man that's on that wall, named Minor White, came and did a 3-day workshop. After he looked at my pictures, he said, well, they're really shit, but I think you could learn something. In this picture, I bet he spoke for a good 30 minutes about this barn, and I still remember him saying, inside of that barn are all the things you're going to be bringing out for the rest of your life. And I thought, how the fuck do you know that?
We'll talk a little bit about the constellation of Rosie and Minami. Rosie, of course, was the subject of your first book, Figments. With Minami, so many years later, you had the same feeling as if you were with Rosie.
In the project called Two Muse, we basically felt like we were reinterpreting the world. And Rosie, just like Minami later, each had this intuitive sense that whatever they were around, they could be it. Rosie standing with this wonderful painting by Gustave Caillebotte, which is this huge painting. It's a rainy day Paris. And immediately she feels like she's part of the painting. And she changed the painting. When I met Minami in 2008 and I saw her performing in a subway station in New York in Union Square, my first impression was, it's Rosie come to life as a wonderful Japanese dancer. You never know what the performance is because it's all about the moment. And in some ways, that's what relates to making a picture. You have to make a picture, boom, right when you're there and that other person's there. And so that is the essence of her interpretation of Buto, which is very, very in the now.
I want to change gears over
to
Cindy Sherman. We
Excalibur.
have a very unusual setting that a photographer can photograph Cindy Sherman. It's not quite often.
That museum in Akron gave her her first American retrospective. Her exercises involved her as a character. So she started doing this kind of performative stuff very early. She was basically very shy. And the personae that she created were a means for her to communicate out into the world. And so what I brought with me was two little masks, a little white mask and a little black mask. That picture comes from that June '84 session next to one of her paintings. Cindy was incredibly controlling later as she got more and more well-known and famous, controlling about the time and the kinds of images she shared with anybody photographing her. At this point, she was still fairly unknown. And because Cindy was still sort of on the periphery, they hired a guy who was totally on the periphery to take her picture.
I thought we could talk about Ilse.
Ilse.
She was also born in Frankfurt, right?
Born in Frankfurt, another Frankfurter. And the first pictures we make of her is this 86-year-old fashion model with her dog for the story for the FAZ. In my mind, of course, I wanted to do this picture, this redo of her very famous picture. The story is that when Ilse in the 30s had left Frankfurt probably in 28 or 29 and arrived in Paris, she became known as the Queen of the Leica. And she was competing with some very heavy-duty boys there. You might have heard of a man named Cartier-Bresson, or André Crétege, or Man Ray. Those were the big boys in the club. And Ilse was the queen of the Leica. But this picture that I did, probably about 2010 for the first time, with Christina, who was in my studio and did incredible Photoshop work with it. It was an attempt to combine her 1931 self-portrait and my 86 portrait of her. What about Bukowski? So the answer to what about Bukowski is hidden between these covers. I photographed, and it was my first assignment for Hans-Georg Pospischil from FAZ. And at that point, I had never really done much with lights. I was just a total naive. And I spent 2.5 days drinking with Bukowski, making pictures, and then getting drunk and making more pictures. I come back to New York, I get everything processed, and I ship it off to FAZ. So a week later, we have an appointment at the Algonquin Hotel, and Hans-Georg literally comes down the steps with my little manila envelope in his hand, comes up to this place where I'm sitting waiting for breakfast, takes the envelope, throws it on the floor, and says, "Scheisse." And I knew that was not good. And he starts by telling me that our magazine, which comes out every Friday, is this incredible mystery island that everybody can go to get away from their daily life every weekend. And what you brought me was information of an old man in his backyard or with a beer or his typewriter. And we don't give a shit about information. We want you to make the pictures about the mythos that surrounds that man. And I look at Hans-Georg and I go, how am I going to do that? He says, that's your problem. I then have to call Bukowski and say, Hank, you're not going to believe this, but they need more pictures. And then we fly out. Me and a truck full of equipment and my friend Randy knock on his door at 10 o'clock. And he lives south of Los Angeles. And he opens the door and he says, who the fuck are you? And he's clearly pulling my leg. He says, I'm really still hungover. Give me another couple hours. I'll go back and rest. I'll take a bath and come down and you guys can set up. So we go and set up the lights. And finally he comes down. He's coming down the stairs. His hair's all wet. He's got a t-shirt and a Bowie knife. And he holds it in front of my face and he tears his shirt. Is this what these fucking krauts want? And I said, perfect. And so we start shooting, and it changes the way I think. Because the other part of the lecture from Hans-Georg was, when people look at a magazine, they spend about 1/4 second on a picture, if you're lucky. He says, your job is to get them to stop at your pictures for at least 1/2 second. We're not asking for a lot, but it's a 100% jump. Do it. And it sort of clicks in my head that a picture is not something just to gloss over. You need to want to live in it. You need to want to go there. You need to want to go to that island and make it yours.